This video is going to be all about conditions, and there's also a help chart. The chart that we're going to use later in the video is also on page 33 in your chart book with different examples. So you'll have the one that I give you here and then the one in your chart book when you need to go back and actually do work. So in English, a condition is an if-then statement. Use them all the time. So it's the same in Latin. So it's an if-then statement. A condition is the circumstances that have significant influence on or determine the outcome of something. Okay. Now, for instance, I will give you an if-then statement. If you think you are going dressed like that, then you should think again. All right. So the first part of the statement here begins with an if and is an adverbial clause, which you also know as a dependent clause. So as you'll remember, a dependent clause has a subject. Here is the subject, you, right? And it also has a verb, think. But it is not a complete sentence because it's an unfinished thought by itself. If I said, if you think you're going out like that, there's nothing, right? So this is the if clause, and it's also called the protasis, okay? So it's a dependent clause or the conditions. The condition, remember, what's the effect your choice of clothing is going to have? Well, I'm going to tell you in the then, right? So it says, if you choose to wear that particular outfit, then your choice of clothing will determine whether or not you get to leave the house, right? The second part of the statement begins with then, and it is the conclusion. It tells us what happens if the if happens. Now, this is an independent clause. Remember, the first one's a dependent. It's the condition. It's an independent clause, which means it can stand alone as a complete sentence. It's called the apodosis. So, stand alone. Then you should think again. That is actually a complete sentence. So we have conditions in Latin as well, both in the indicative, remember, which the indicative is the real thing, the thing that is going to happen, and the subjunctive, the thing that may or may not happen, the thing we wish would happen or wish would not, right? So a positive condition, which means likely to happen, right? A positive condition is likely to happen, is always introduced by si, which means if. So for a negative condition, which basically means not likely to happen, it's always introduced by nisi, which means if, ellipsis, not, something in between, or unless. So, and this makes conditions really easy to spot. So if I said, si capta eris omnia a miserimus, if you are captured, we will have lost everything. And there is an implied then in here. You could add a then and it would make total sense. If you're captured, we will have lost everything. And nisi cibum tulisem non edisimus. If we had not brought food, so here we have the not, if blank not, remember right here. Or you could also say, unless we had brought food, we would have eaten, right? If I had not brought food, we would not have eaten. Now, the good thing about conditions is you only appear in the present, past, and future tenses. Okay, so simple conditions, that's what we're going to talk about first. Simple conditions, you can see simple present, simple past, and, well, also called more vivid. In the case of the future tense, always use the indicative mood. So, left half of the chart always uses the indicative mood. So they're real in the sense that they have happened or are likely to happen. And they are used when it's likely that the protasis will come true. All right, let's work through these. Simple present. I'm going to erase this so we can make some marks. Simple present. It uses present indicatives. So if I said, si mons erumpit, this is, remember, this is just present, regular present indicative tense. Lacus unundat. So both of the apodosis and the protasis, both of them take a present indicative. Super easy. It's everything you've known before. So I'm also going to tell you, mons, means mountain, but the Romans didn't have a word for volcano. For instance, Mount Vesuvius or Pompeii, right? At Pompeii, it would just been Mons Vesuvius, right? They would not have called it volcano. So not every mountain is a volcano, but it can be translated as mountain or volcano. All right. So if the volcano erupts, then the lake floods. Both of them are in the present tense. We have an if and a then there. Pretty easy. Simple past. It uses imperfect or perfect indicatives. Do you remember how long time ago I told you that you had to only use imperfect and it had to have a was or a were? And when you got later in your Latin life this past year, I told you that they considered imperfect and perfect kind of interchangeable. This is another place to do it. What you want to do is make it make good sense. So here's the same sentence, and the same sentence is used for all the examples. That kind of helps you give a comparison of them. Si mons erumpibat lacus undabat. If the volcano was erupting, here we have it in the imperfect, then the lake was flooding. Okay, here we can do it in perfect indicative. Si mons erupit lacus undavit. If the volcano erupted, here it's in the perfect, then the lake flooded. So here is imperfect example, and here is a perfect example. Okay. Future more vivid. It uses future or future perfect indicatives, right? Just depending on what you want to say. So either one of those, it makes sense. Now here's the new thing. Translate the protasis in the present tense. Here's your new thing. And remember, this is called future more vivid because think about it. If something's vivid, it's more visible. So you can think of it as more likely to happen as opposed to when we have future less vivid. I can't see the future as clearly. It may or may not be true when I get there. Think of it as like a mirage. Is it real or is it not? Okay. Future more vivid. So translate the protasis in the present tense. And will is often understood in the protasis, okay? All right, so, and then we translate the apodosis in the future tense. So, first part gets in the present. The apodosis gets translated in the future, although they are, both the verbs here are in future or future perfect. That's the tricky part, so just remember that. So, si mons erumpet, that's future. Lacus iundabit, future. Okay, if the volcano erupts, we're going to translate in the present, then the lake will flood. Future. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at contrary to fact conditions. Okay, they always use the subjunctive mood, right? So got to remember this. This is why it's taken so long for us to learn them, because you need to learn the subjunctives. Now you haven't learned all the subjunctive moods yet. We just did present and we did imperfect. You will learn all of these. Okay, so it has not happened and is not likely to happen. Remember, it's used when uncertain if the protasis will come true. And that first one, when I said, if you think you're going out dressed like that, then think again. As your mother, I'm telling you, what I'm really saying is, if you wear those clothes, you will not go out. So I am absolutely certain that that is going to be the conclusion should you choose to wear that outfit. Now, I would use the indicative for that in whatever case and tense and whatever the context is, right, of the sentence and what I'm talking about. Now, if I'm not sure, it's a may or you might not want to go out like that. I'm giving you actually the choice, right? If you think you're going out like that, you might want to think again, right? Maybe you're not in my household anymore, so I don't have control about what you're wearing anymore. Or maybe you decide to wear the bathing suit and in the snow because you're 3 years old and you love your bathing suit, and I'm going to let you do it. But I'm going to let you make the choice. Okay. Because you'll learn that way. All right, so they're called contrary to fact because remember, fact is something, and when we do indicative, it is a fact. We're stating a fact. And it's called contrary to fact simply because the fact that it may not actually become a fact. So the present contrary to fact implies that the protasis is not being fulfilled right now. Okay, and it uses imperfect subjunctives, and when you translate, there's a were or a would there. So, Simons romperet lacus inundaret. So uses imperfect subjunctives, what we just learned. You remember we just learned this week. It uses, there. You remember that second principal part used the infinitive, just the simple endings on it. So uses imperfect subjunctives. If the volcano were erupting, here's the were, the lake would flood. Okay? Or you can say if the volcano erupted, because remember, imperfect and perfect. So if the volcano erupted, then the lake would be flooded. So use that would or were in there. Okay, but remember when you translate imperfect subjunctives, you can do the perfect sometime, but you wouldn't make them both perfect. Okay, all right. So past contrary to fact. It implies the process was not fulfilled in the past. So present means it's not being fulfilled right now, right? And the process was not filled in the past. So it uses pluperfect subjunctives. Okay. Simons erupisset lacus iunda viset. If the volcano had, there we have our had erupted, then the lake would have flooded. So gets translated as a had and a would have. Okay. If the volcano had erupted, the lake would have flooded. Okay. So pay attention. You'll probably need your chart book for a while until you learn how to do this and to follow the pattern. If you have a pattern that you follow when you translate, you'll learn them relatively quickly. So we don't know if the volcano had erupted. It hadn't done that and was likely not to have done that in the past. Because remember the protasis, this is the protasis, the first part. There you go. First part is the protasis. Okay. Now let's look at the last one. The future less vivid says that the protasis may or may not end up happening, remember, in the future. So I can't see the future clearly. The weird thing is it uses present subjunctives. So do you understand that we have imperfect, pluperfect, and present. So we don't use future subjunctives. We don't use perfect subjunctives. We only have these three choices. Okay, and remember that these are easy to spot because they start with a C or a nisi, right? So it's not as confusing as you think it will. Just break it down. Look for what tense everything is in. Look and see if it's subjunctive or indicative, and that will help you. All right. So it translates as should or would or were verbing would. Okay. So Simons erampat. So present subjunctives. Remember we changed the E to an A here. Lacus iundet. If the volcano were erupting, so here's our were and the ing, the lake would, so here we're using the second pattern right here. The lake would flood. All right, or you could say if the volcano should erupt, here we're using our should, the lake would flood. Right, but all of them are in the present. Just be careful how you translate them because it's not as you've normally seen. Okay. So that is it. You can review this video. You can also look in your chart book, break it down. I'm going to give you the review again. Remember, real, what we call real is it's happened or is likely to happen, and it's used when likely that the protasis will come true. Unreal, we use the subjunctive. It has not happened, is not likely to happen. It's used when uncertain if the protasis will come true. So I'm going to erase all this really quick for you because I just want you to remember some things that you need to remember. Remember, simple present uses present indicatives. It's translated in the present, right? Simple past uses imperfect or perfect indicatives, right? Future more vivid uses future or future perfect indicatives. And the important thing to remember is you translate in the present tense. Okay? Now, the subjunctive, you can always recognize all of these because they start with a C or a nisi. It implies the process is not being fulfilled right now, meaning the first half, the if part, and it uses imperfect subjunctives. I've given you some. Here's how to translate, right? Past contrary to fact implies the process was not fulfilled in the past, uses pluperfect subjunctives. Here's some translation hints. Future less vivid, the process, the if statement may or may not end up happening in the future. The odd thing is it uses present subjunctives, and here's your translations. So take some notes, do some highlighting on your chart book. You can do this. Just break it down. Couple last things to talk about that are sort of like the exceptions to the rule when we deal with conditions. The first one is mixed conditions, and mixed conditions combine one type of process. Remember, the process is the if statement, and a different type of apodosis. Then you'll recognize them because when you look at the tense, or is it indicative or subjunctive of the verbs that you see in the sentence, they won't match what you know follows the rules. So they're slightly different, and you're going to treat the two halves of the sentence here separately in the translation and in what kind of verb. So if you look at this first one, si deliquissem doleres, the first part of it here, I'm gonna highlight in one color so you can see. Si deliquissem is past contrary to fact, and you know past contrary to fact takes a pluperfect subjunctive, which you're looking right there, and deliquissem is a pluperfect subjunctive. It gets translated as had, so that's how we're gonna do that. Let's get a different color here, and dolores is a present contrary to fact. It takes the imperfect subjunctive and it translates with a would. So it's okay that they break up sometimes. If I had melted, you would be sad. Just treat them as two separate halves, and that should be pretty easy. All right, substitutions. So imperatives and ablative absolutes may take the place of one element of the condition. So the first part of si solem videas is future less vivid. And then, of course, we have right here, we have an imperative fuge. All right, so future less vivid takes present subjunctive, and then we just have a regular imperative on the second. So if you should see the sun, flee. So here we have our imperative. Here we have our future left vivid in the process. All right. With the sun shining, I would have melted. Sole fulgente deliquissem. So it's an ablative absolute. So we've got sole here with the sun, and fulgente, ablative absolute. You remember our NT that's right here. And then the second half is a past contrary to fact. Past contrary to fact uses pluperfect subjunctives, and the apodosis takes a would have. I would have melted. All right, here's an ablative absolute, can also be translated as if. Same beginning, sole, fulgente. If the sun had shone, there's an if there instead of with the sun shining, I would have melted. Takes an ablative absolute, and the second portion is a future less vivid. I would have melted. Remember, future less vivid takes a present subjunctive and is translated as the apodosis is translated as would. All right, that's it. Have a great week.